I am very excited about my guest for today to bring into the chat in just a second. Gustavo Razzetti is a CEO and founder of Fearless Culture. Gustavo is passionate about helping teams do the best work of their lives. He is a sought-after speaker, culture consultant, and author of 3 books. Gustavo's work has been featured in Psychology Today, the New York Times, Forbes, BBC, and many other publications around the world. Throughout his career, he has advised companies in multiple business sectors, including GM, Continental, Coca-Cola, Mars, and Comcast.
How do we recreate the sense of belonging when people get back to the office, even if they get back for 1 day or 2? Because people feel weird. People feel afraid. They were in this cocoon for a couple of years, and now they need to go and meet back people. They need to meet their colleagues that they haven't seen for months, years. They have to meet new people who joined the company and they never met in person.
Welcome back to The Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world. Hey everyone, it's Jason and welcome back to the Thermostat podcast. We are now, believe it or not, we are over 125 episodes, which is hard to believe, 125 episodes. And I am more convinced of this than ever that developing authentic leadership and cultures of caring, authentic cultures that are compelling to people are as important and needed in the world as ever. And so excited that so many people, if you're new to the podcast, welcome. Glad you're listening. Glad this continues to grow and spread. If you're one of the OGs from the very beginning when this began, and you continue to find value and that this contributes to your week, to your month, to your life and work, then I'm so excited. So if anybody, of course, would do a quick favor before we start and launch into today's conversation that I'm super excited about, by the way. But if everybody takes a moment, if you will rate it 5 stars, of course. If you believe it to be 5 stars, give it 5 stars. If you will leave a nice review, if you'll share it with your network, all those ways, believe it or not, that's how these things spread. And so I hate that I always have to say that, but evidently that's the way that it works, that you gotta say that and people got to share it so that it can amplify the message further out in the world. So thanks for everybody that takes a moment to do that. I am very excited about my guest for today to bring into the chat in just a second. Gustavo Razzetti is a CEO and founder of Fearless Culture. Gustavo is passionate about helping teams do the best work of their lives. He is a sought-after speaker, culture consultant, and author of 3 books. Gustavo's work has been featured in Psychology Today, the New York Times, Forbes, BBC, and many other publications around the world. Throughout his career, he has advised companies in multiple business sectors, including GM, Continental, Coca-Cola, Mars. I like to believe that that's the planet Mars, and Comcast. Gustavo lives in Chicago with his wife and 2 sons. I was introduced to Gustavo by our mutual friend, Raj Shroff. So shout out to Raj if you're out there. A few years back when he said, you guys just need to know each other. And anytime somebody says that you just need to know each other, I'm excited about. So we did a phone call a few years back now and have been following each other's stuff. And so super excited to really support Gustavo today and also share with you about his new book. So excited to celebrate this work and bring Gustavo into the podcast. So Gustavo, welcome.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you for hosting me. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm very excited, especially today, which is a very interesting day for me because my book is out tomorrow. So I don't think I'm going to sleep. I can tell you.
These are exciting times. So yeah, the book officially launches tomorrow. So as this podcast is coming out, the book will now be available. So you're going to hear more about it, the book today on the podcast, and you'll see some notes in the show notes to make sure that you have a chance to go and pick up his great book. But I know everything that comes with that, the excitement, the angst, the courage that it takes also to launch something new and share your thoughts with the world. So congrats to you for doing that and being at this part of the journey. And I know others, especially on this podcast, will help it be a success. So glad to have you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So before we dive into the new book, though, specifically, we both are guys that love talking culture and leadership. And so I think that that's an appropriate part, at least place for us to start our conversation today. Culture is such a buzzword and for right reasons. Again, we love it. We know how important it is. But in the world that we're in right now that has experienced so many different challenges and changes over the last couple of years. Just let me start out there. Why, from your perspective, why is this talk around culture? Why is this so important?
I think, you might have heard, many of you might have heard this saying that culture is strategy for breakfast. So I'm not going to say support that. I'm going to say I don't support that saying. I say that culture amplifies strategy. So it's not one or the other. We need both. Companies need strong strategies, need to be focused, need to have great products, great innovation. And then culture is like an amplifier. So if you're doing something right, your culture can take it to the next level. But if you don't, your culture can screw up. The point about culture is many people think that culture is invisible. And yes, there are many elements that are not easy to observe, but there are many ways that the culture of the company manifests. So if you go to an office, the way the receptionist react to you when she or he is welcoming you, if you need to go through 7 layers in a company to meet the CEO or whatever, all those small elements and behavior say a lot about the company culture. For me, culture is a system, and there are 3 key elements that basically are part of that system, which is the emotions, how we feel about the company we work out, how we feel about our job and our colleagues. Then the mindset. What are the filters that we use to see that reality? Either are we overly optimistic about our company? Are we overly negative about our culture? Are we neutral? And last but not least, the behaviors. So the collection of all those 3 elements is the system that defines what we call culture.
Absolutely. No, and you and I, we are aligned in so many ways, and my audience will hear that very clearly as it's the thinking, acting, and interacting. That it's from that thinking, and do we have even an understanding around what is that culture that we desire? And from that thinking and that mindset around the kind of culture that we're wanting to create, do we have actions that align and bring it to life so that it's not just this figment of our imagination, but it's something that we actually bring to life in our actions with each other and every little interaction. So like you're explaining about the walking into a company in the front desk, the vibe that you get, the way that they think, act, and interact, and they welcome you and invite you into the space and into that culture, that it is intentional. And it's a design. And again, people that are familiar with my messages, that every single one of us is setting that temperature. And that is, as we become more clear of the thinking, acting, and interacting, or those kind of those feelings and the mindsets and the behaviors, is it aligned with the temperature that we're trying to set as a team or as an organization? And so, obviously it's always been important. It'll continue to be important. But I think with all of the challenges and everything that we've faced in the last 2 years, I think it's even more important and certainly related to your new book that now is just out. But your book, the new book, Remote, Not Distance, is the name of the book, Remote, Not Distant. I think there are some real specific reasons of why that idea is important in culture shaping right now. And so let's just start there. Why this book? Why were you compelled to write this book?
Why not? I mean, it's a great question. I think that, to be honest, I was writing another book. I was writing a book on culture, like culture design. And at some point, because of, there was a global pandemic, a global disruption that shake the workplace across all countries, across all continents. And many people, because we started with my team helping companies not just design their culture, but also adapt now that we need to work remotely? What are the not only like the tools and the behaviors, but actually what are the right ways to keep the team connected, build belonging, and many other aspects. So at that point, people say, hey, why don't you focus on write something? Because you've been coaching and training so many companies to adapt to this new reality. So I decided, hey, let's do it. And I embarked on a journey that it was really interesting, not only in terms of writing itself, which I love, but also I have to let go of some ideas that I have, because I, like many of us, were raised in this world that, hey, we think that an office is central, not being connected at the same place, working together is critical to building culture. And basically, you can do it without an office, and an office can help, but it's not mandatory for a team to have a strong culture. So in that regards, I think for me, the book is about sharing my journey, what I learned working with companies, but also interview a lot of people across the world in different types of organization. I meet with people we are all about remote, and that's the only word. There are people that are, hey, remote is never going to work. And then people who are starting to see, hey, hybrid can be the future. And actually, many people were very skeptical because they say, hybrid's not going to work. It's going to bring the worst of both worlds. And my hypothesis, and basically what I'm trying to prove and share with my book is, yes, done right, it's hard, but hybrid can be the best of both worlds, in office and remote.
Yeah, no, I love that. And again, my listeners will this will resonate with them. I talked about that your building is not your culture, that oftentimes companies think of that their physical building is their culture. And the reality is as we know that buildings are really important, and well-designed buildings and office spaces and places help to either enhance culture or in many ways detract from it and make it harder. But in the world that we've been in with so many remote workers and hybrid working, that the culture again is the thinking, acting, and interacting that takes place outside of physical spaces. And so I'm interested, and I love the idea that hybrid, again, not easy. None of this, we're not saying any of this is easy, of course, but that it can be the best of both worlds. I'm interested in what are some of the biggest challenges that you've watched over the last 2 years with trying to do remote or hybrid work? Because I think as you enter into this conversation about remote, not distant, there's a problem we're trying to solve. Right? There's challenges that we've identified. What are some of the biggest challenges that you saw people experiencing with remote or hybrid work over the last couple of years?
Cool. I think the biggest issue is trust. And one thing that happened is the pandemic basically disrupted, as I said before, everyone at the same time. So all companies were forced to work remotely. So what happened there is it wasn't a choice. So, hey, let's figure it out. And people were able to keep businesses afloat. In many companies, actually, research shows that people productivity increased. So if you see from an objective lens, even if it was not desired, even if it was uncomfortable, even if it was imposed on us, even if we're not ready, people adapted. That's the great thing about human beings. We find our way out, especially when we work together. So in that regards, managers have to trust people more than they were used to, because they didn't have a choice or they say, we have to trust you, and that's it. Now that we're getting back into, now we have an option. People can say, hey, we're going to go back to whatever normal used to be. We can continue working like the pandemic 100% remotely, or we can find a new way of working. And in this scenario where we can choose, companies are basically going to back, you know what? I don't trust you anymore, so I want to see you. Because managers are used to manage by a presentism. So if you're there in your cubicle, if you work 10 hours, if you're sending countless emails, if you're in meeting after meeting, you're working, you're productive. So they focus on visibility rather than focus on outcome or impact.
Yep.
And that's one of the critical things about, okay, if you don't trust your people, you want them to be there. You mentioned the idea of the office. For many companies, they invested, let's say, Apple or Google, they invested billions of dollars in having nice HQ, lots of perks, great design. And so who's going to say, hey, we got it wrong, now we don't need the office? So everyone wants to basically convince themselves who made that investment that the office is critical. The second element that connects with trust is this idea of binary thinking. So leaders still think of the office and working remotely like two different animals, rather than think, when does each of them work best? So, for example, if we want to bring the culture together, we want to create a sense of belonging, we want to launch a team, or we want to basically align the team into the new vision, well, being in person is perfect. However, for most collaboration, even for decision making, you can do that asynchronously and in a remote space. So rather than see that they're either or, we need to integrate them. We need to find when each of them works best. And last but not least, the third element is flexibility. Flexibility in terms of, once again, the past normal was one size fits all solution. The pandemic was another one-size-fits-all solution because we all were forced to work from home. Now there are options. And if there's one thing that people learn and basically embrace during the pandemic is, hey, I can manage not just where I work from, but when do I work from? And this is for me the biggest shift. It's not about location, it's about schedule. People want to redesign their work schedule. And this doesn't mean slack, like, Elon Musk and many others are, people working from home, they're slacking. On the contrary, people, if they have control on their personal and professional time, they're going to deliver better work, which is in the end, to your point, why we need culture. Culture is the accelerator. Culture is not the outcome. It's something that helps people provide better outcomes.
Yeah, and that shift in the thinking from it being about just visibility to outcome and impact is a big shift in our minds. As we've gotten used to thinking that's the way I know somebody is quote unquote working, is just if I can see them, and that element of trust. If I can't see them, then I don't trust that they're working, and really challenged to then say, well, it's actually about the outcome and the impact, and a level of trust with your employee to say, I trust you to schedule your time and to bring your very best to produce the outcome and the impact that we want. And that's what I think is part of that evolution that's happening right now. I think you're absolutely right. When the pandemic hit, forced innovation is what we had. And so places, again, had to reactionary go into and use technologies that has been around for a while, but people then were forced to kind of figure them out and actually start implementing them in those kind of ways. And in that kind of mess of it, we saw great teams and organizations really thrive and rise to the level of occasion, and really productivity, and by a lot of studies and metrics that people were actually even more productive in these remote settings in some cases. But then we also saw that we're all learning how to do this. And so there was a lot of scatteredness. There was a lot of screen fatigue and burnout. There was trying to fit the old way of working into just this new virtual world. And really, I think I've done past podcasts about this idea that we've got to rethink, and we've got to do the virtual meetings better. We've got to re-engage people differently. So your example a few minutes ago is bringing everybody together to get everybody aligned and vision and connecting as a team is a great in-person thing. And then to be thoughtful about how are the ways that we're leveraging virtual experiences differently for different tasks and different ways of connecting with each other. But I believe we're still kind of working our way through it, and many places are getting better at being able to do it. So remote, not distant. Share a few highlights from the book, or there are all kinds of great nuggets and takeaways in the book. But what would be, 3 or so highlights from the book that you would want to share with the audience today?
Fantastic. I'm trying to connect with the flow we're discussing now to build on that. I think that the one highlight for me is intentionality. You talk about culture. What is culture? Well, culture can happen by chance or can happen by design. And many people believe, no, culture is organic. Yes, it's organic, but within certain parameters. So you cannot just say, hey, my culture is going to grow in the right direction. If you don't put certain parameters, it's not. So I give an example, like if you're the mayor of a city, you set certain parameters. What's the speed limit for this street? Is this a two-way street, one-way street, and so on and so forth? Where there's a stop signal. And then people decide if they're going to walk, they're going to bike, they're going to drive the car, which music they're going to be listening when they're riding the car. So that combination between design and organic personal choices is what brings culture. So many people, to your point before, they were thinking, hey, culture, I have a set of values, maybe a purpose, and check, and perks. No, that's my culture. That's it. Yeah. Well, that's not culture. No, we need to, you talk about the action and the interaction. Well, how do we design that action and that interaction? And successful remote first or hybrid companies are even more intentional. They're very obsessive about how they design the experience, from how they document, how they share, how they make decisions in written form, how they facilitate conversations in a remote or hybrid setting. Also, for example, one simple tip in Microsoft, when they're having hybrid meetings, the person who facilitates, it's always one that's joining remotely. So it's not in the office. So it gives you that framework, that mindset that we talk about. Simple hack, but it's always being intentional about those elements. That's one.
Yeah, well, and let me just react to that is absolutely. And again, this is where you and I are so well aligned is that, yeah, and my audience is going to recognize that and be jumping up and smiling as we talk about it, is that a culture is about intentionality. So oftentimes when somebody, you walk into a company and they say they want to change the culture, say, well, the culture is already changing. The culture is always, it's dynamic. It's changing moment by moment every single day. And so to your point is, well, yeah, to just say it'll magically become what we want it to be is not realistic. And so with intentionality and design and parameters, I like that word that you used to say, how are we obsessing and relentless about the culture and the experience that we want to have, the actions and behaviors that will help lead us there? And then realizing that it's dynamic. We're always going to be contributing to it. And it won't always be perfect, but we at least are doing it with intention and by design. I love that.
And that design, it's not a top-down process. And that's where many companies get it wrong. No, it's not the CEO with the board sitting down and saying, hey, this is the culture we want. Especially in today's world, we need to involve people. So it's the CEO and direct reports have the last word on everything culture related. So they define it. But when it comes to designing it and creating it, it's co-created and it's called design. So basically, they need to invite people to the party to discuss what are the best solutions that we can bring to the table. But also, you said this at the beginning, what people do shapes culture, not what the leader does. The leader basically defines culture, they model it, they shape the right behavior, set clear expectations. But in the end, how people act, that's what culture is going to be. I always make this analogy between like families and leadership, no? And as parents, we can shape the culture, but our kids also have more than one saying in what's the family culture. It's not top down, it's co-created.
No doubt. Absolutely. I'm shaking my head as you're talking every word of that, because the word I talk about is that we are a participatory world. And so it doesn't mean that the CEO or the leader of the team or the department head doesn't have an enormous role in helping to lead and shape culture. Absolutely. But it's not going to be just by top down, handed down. I think we have enough experience and also data to tell us that doesn't work, that it has to be co-created. And we all share in the creation of the culture that we want when we're a part of a family, a team, or an organization. Many teams and organizations right now are realizing that they need to do both. They need to engage the minds and hearts of their people in person, where everyone in the room can experience the energy of congregating together and find clarity for the road ahead. And they also need to continue to find ways to engage the minds and hearts of their people virtually, with those who are working remotely or at a distance. So, if you are in the process of planning your next team meeting, company all-hands event, conference, or culture summit, and are looking for support with a powerful keynote speech, facilitated team conversations that are the currency for change, or deeper development on leadership mindset and an intentional strategy for the culture you're trying to create, I hope you'll contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. It is my privilege and our honor to partner with great people to provide support in these areas. We want to breathe oxygen into your leaders and throughout your organization so you can set the temperature you want for your culture. We look forward to connecting with you soon. What else would you share, Gustavo, about the book? What's another highlight?
I'm looking for inspiration. I'm looking at your map behind you. So another thing that's important about culture, going back into bringing people into the party, is that people observe a lot of things that happens, good and bad, within the culture that leaders miss. A couple of months ago, I read an article that actually Africa, which I'm seeing in your map, is larger, much larger than we actually think. But someone, when they created the first global map, they made North America look bigger than it actually is, and Africa smaller. So that's a decision that a leader, whoever that was, made. And I think that we're missing the reality. And that's exactly what happens with many companies. You know, there's a leader that say, hey, this is how we want to present our culture. They make decisions, but they miss lots of facts. That's what we need to invite people through conversations. One activity that we encourage people to do is to discuss what's hybrid. Now, with many companies saying, hey, we're going hybrid. What does that mean? In my book, I present there are 6 different ways of doing hybrid. Some are more top-down, some are more delegating the power and decision-making into the team. So it's important that we reflect. There's no one size fits all. There's no one single hybrid model. Evaluate the pros and cons and define the one that works best for you. But don't do it in isolation. Don't create your own version of Africa. Create a model that's going to work for your real company.
I love it. Absolutely. And in every team and organization, from my observations and direct work with many, is that we're in this stage right now where we are all negotiating together is what is that working environment going to look like for today and tomorrow? And what is that, future of work that everybody's talking about? And part of it is we have to be able to define, well, what is it we want? What is, for us, what is that hybrid model or that remote model or that in-person model, whatever it is that's authentic for us? What is it and why do we want it and why do we think this will be the most effective? And then let's get clear on that so that back to the parameters is that we don't have any wasted fuel. We all are in alignment as, what direction we're going and how we're committed to going together.
Mm-hmm. And if you want another tip, I'm building on your background again.
Yeah,
All you need is love.
Yeah.
All you need is belonging. Since the human race basically began inhabiting this planet, we had this idea that we need to belong. We need to belong to a tribe in order to survive. So our ancestors couldn't survive on their own. They need to hunt together. They need to protect themselves together as a group. So that question, all you need is love, all you need is to belong, still resonates with us. We're still asking that. So there's 2 perspectives or 2 points of view when it comes to belonging. One is, how do we recreate that sense of belonging remotely when we're not always together at the same place? We don't have those impromptu conversations. But on the other hand, and today there were a couple of people posting this, how do we recreate the sense of belonging when people get back to the office, even if they get back for 1 day or 2? Because people feel weird. People feel afraid. They were in this cocoon for a couple of years, and now they need to go and meet back people. They need to meet their colleagues that they haven't seen for months, years. They have to meet new people who joined the company and they never met in person. I cannot stress this enough, how stressful it is for people to re-meet in person. I mean, I do a lot of facilitation with different teams, and we had teams that never met in person. And the first time they got together, everything but good things happened. There was so many frictions, so many tensions that you need to facilitate. So you need to make sure that sense of belonging not only is designed when people are not together, but most importantly, that you take into consideration all the emotions that are going to come in place when people get to be together.
Yeah, that's a huge and important point that you just made, Gustavo, is that again, the social awkwardness that you see of then people that have been, distant and asked to isolate, but then coming back together, and for us to ignore the reality that is a bit awkward for some, and or it takes time and connection to then build that back up, is just not realistic if we don't account for that. And so it's back to that intentionality that you were talking about earlier, is that if what we want is a team and an organization where people are connected and feel like they belong, then again, even in the midst of awkwardness, we're going to have to find the right recipe for how we bring people together and help break through that awkwardness and discomfort with each other, and also set ourselves up so that we can work remotely in ways that where we don't become so isolated and lose that connection and lose that sense of belonging. So that intentionality is huge.
Indeed. And I think that you mentioned about the idea that we need to figure it out. I don't know exactly what was the language you used previously, but I think that that's the point. We need to start as leaders with intellectual humility. We need to understand and say, hey, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what the future of work is going to look like. Because to be honest, my book is not about this is the future. No, I'm providing like a roadmap for organizations to reflect what happened before the pandemic, what happened after the pandemic, and let's start building on the good thing that happened in both stages and see what we're going to do. There's no one size fits all. There's no silver bullets. And you have to design your own culture and your own model moving forward. Amen. But you have to be brave enough as a leader to acknowledge, first, it's going to be hard. It's going to require lots of experimentations. You need to let go of power. You need to trust your team more than ever, and you need to involve them in the process if you want to find the right path.
Yep, I love that. And humility, listening, actively engaging with your people and together to be becoming more reflective and clear on what is it that we want together. And it doesn't mean we have it figured out. Doesn't mean there's one size fits all. Doesn't mean there is that silver bullet or that magic button that you hit and it magically all falls into place. But he or she who aims at nothing hits it every time. So if we don't know what we're aiming for or what we're trying to create and how we're committed to working together, then why would we be surprised when it doesn't show up that way? So taking the time to be reflective and then together participatory, all of us being ambassadors for that culture, now we begin to get more clear. What I've got a question too for you too, Gustavo, is for somebody out there that might be listening and they may be, working remotely right now, and yet they're struggling that they don't feel a sense of belonging, or they're struggling with kind of this kind of remote work. What recommendation would you have for that person?
I think it's important to make time for that. No, so in the past we assume we basically the time happened. Either it was a lunch break, coffee break, or whatever. We had a person or bathroom break. We have some interaction and we could talk about sports, family, whatever. Now we need to design those moments. And I know that it feels artificial. Hey, I'm going to make like a time, but there are many companies that, for example, they have meetings that are in which it's forbidden to talk about work. So there are meetings that are just about bonding. There are a lot of tools that companies have in place, like Slack, in which you can create channels for connection. For example, the companies have channels where people discuss movies or music, or they do whatever. So it's a nice way to create that connection, because this is critical. You don't need to build the same level of connection with everyone in the team. You need to find the people who you relate to, who you connect to, and try to build that. Don't try to divide your time equally into all team members, because that's not going to happen. I mean, we still resonate with affinity. So try to find the people that share similar passions, regardless art, sports, music, whatever, and connect with them. Building something collectively like a team, it's also very important. Like, for example, creating like a team playlist in which each team member brings their favorite song. So it's a nice way to build something together, but also to learn more about each other. There are many teams that also organize activities in person in maybe their neighborhood. So they go and help a local a food bank or a local school or whatever cause they want to support. And that's a great excuse to get together outside of work and build that connection with team members around something that people feel passionate. So once again, it's not something that, no offense taken, HR, rather than coming from someone else, it's the team who decide, hey, let's do this and let's help someone. And that's a great way to build that connection.
Yeah, I love all that. Those are practical ideas and things. And I know, I'm sure you've encountered it too, is that you see it on both sides of it. There are people out there right now that absolutely love the remote work and have and are thriving in the remote work environment, and they don't ever want to go back to a certain, like, we know there are people like that. We also know, and I've had a number of conversations recently with people that are being asked to work remotely but are still struggling with it, and or as their team and their organization is still evolving in how you do those and do these better, that they're struggling a little bit. And at least some of the advice that I gave them was don't pull the ripcord too early. That you need to reach out to your team, reach out to your leader, reach out to your organization if it's a place that you want to stay and that you are compelled to be a part of. But let them also know that you are still trying to figure out the best for you, how to be most effective. And obviously with the Great Resignation and all this, we've seen a lot of team members that have just up and pulled the ripcord and jumped to a new place. And in some cases, people need to do that. If you need to be in a better spot, then by all means, you should go there. But in some cases, I've also observed that I think people have pulled the ripcord and gotten out of the situation just because they haven't given it enough time to really and be honest about, hey, I need some better support for how we do this remote thing, and we need better parameters in order for me to be effective in that way. And at the same time, I've also seen people that are wanting to work more remotely, and yet they're kind of pigeonholed in that and feeling as if, well, my team or my leader will never let me do that. And the reality is, well, you need to go have that conversation. We need to courageously be able to say, what is it that an environment you think you can be most effective in, and then together let's negotiate whether this is the right fit for you and for us. And so I just know there's a lot of that out there right now of people wrestling with my company doesn't have it all figured out. Well, I guess both of us are giving some affirmation to the idea that no place has it all figured out, but we are all co-creating it together.
Indeed, and that's a great point. I think that people need to be honest, because if you operate like if you have everything figured out, but you haven't, then you're going to screw up. But second, you're going to send the wrong message rather than say, hey, we are in an experimental phase. This is what we're going to do in the next 2 or 3 months. Then we're going to regroup. We're going to debrief. We're going to find out what worked, what done, and we're going to course correct. And that's the beauty about culture. It's not something, you mentioned that it's something that's fluid. Exactly. Culture evolves. And so should the decisions that we make around it. We talk about the idea of flexibility, and you brought such a great point. Some people have discovered like, hey, now I can work remotely and I love it. But there are people who don't. And companies need to provide solutions for both. So, for example, I talk about the different hybrid models. There's one that basically it's remote first or remote 100. Well, that's exactly the same backlash that having 100% back into the office, because basically you're pushing that everyone's going to work in the same fashion. And some people, for example, if you're young, you just started, it's your maybe first, second job. You want to learn from others. You want to see how other people do things. You need that experience for you to grow. The people that are in the mid 40s, mid 50s, they say, hey, no, I don't need to go back to the office. Leaders that are in their 60s, they don't want to change how they were raised. And actually, they love getting out of their car into that huge building and having everyone like, hey, look at them. Hey, sir. Hey, madam. No, they have that stuff because that's what makes them feel important. So those things are not going to go away. We need to consider them into the design process. They're part of the personas that we design culture for.
Absolutely. And I think, again, part of it, not to just keep repeating the same thing, but it comes down to that intentionality and the courage to be honest, as you just said. What is it that that feels best and where I'm most effective. And then also that you were co-creating it together. So just as I might be somebody that says, yeah, but I want to be remote, but man, I get it's so back to the socially awkward. It gets so awkward when we try to bring people together. And I just would rather if we just stayed fully remotely. Well, if you want a sense of belonging, and that's important to our team and organization, then some of us are going to need to break through that discomfort and extend that to our teammates and vice versa. And so, again, back to that co-creation that we have together. I've got a new book that's coming out in August, and it's called Breathing Oxygen. And part of that idea, which dovetails beautifully into what we're talking about, is the fact that once we have clarity, my last book, Thermostat Cultures, was about that design side of what is the structure and how do we get clear on the process to lead the culture that we want. And the structure that we put into place, those parameters, as you called it, to set the temperature that we want. But as we start to then have the parameters in place, what are the mindsets from a leadership perspective that we need to kind of breathe oxygen into ourselves as individuals that give energy to us? And what do we need to continue to breathe life into our culture? And as I'm listening to you talk, Gustavo, this remote, not distant idea is that we have to continue individually to breathe in good oxygen that fuels us so that we can be effective wherever we are. But also we're going to have to continue to breathe oxygen intentionally into the people around us. And what are those mindsets that we want to fuel so that we can make sure that we're entering the choices that we make in a healthy and also a co-creation kind of experience together. And so I just think I'm excited about what you're doing. I'm excited about this book. And I think it's a part of a conversation that's really obviously happening everywhere right now, but places are still figuring it out. And I still think we're on that really beginning of the wave of how do we negotiate this remote and hybrid and in-person work. So I'm super excited about the work that you're doing.
Yeah, you got me thinking about a metaphor for that. You talk about breathing, and I think that hybrid is like a sea turtle. So we need to learn to breathe under the water, but also to breathe outside the water, and we can store. And I think that's basically the reality. No, we're not one or the other. We need to learn how to live in two spaces.
Oh, I love that.
Breathe in the water and outside the water.
I love that. And in the book, I talk about the breathing is one of those things that we do involuntarily, thankfully, like while you and I are sitting here talking right now, thankfully, we are still breathing. Our bodies.
Oh, I forgot for the past 30 minutes.
Thankfully, it is an involuntary thing, but it's also one of those things that we can do voluntarily. And that we know the power in us then catching ourselves when we need to take in a different breath, when we need to breathe deeper or slower, we need something else. And so culture is that again, the best cultures, there's involuntary breathing that's taking place because we're all aligned and we're on the same page. But there are still going to be times along the way where we need to stop and make sure that we're breathing in good oxygen for the next step of the journey, the next path that we're on together. So I'm super excited about what you're doing. Obviously, in the show notes for everybody listening out there, we're going to have Gustavo's contact information, but you can certainly connect with him on LinkedIn. I think you're on Twitter as well. We'll put in the show notes different ways in which you can connect with Gustavo if that's authentic for you. And I would encourage everybody to check out his book, Remote, Not Distant. Which again, we'll put that in the show notes as well. Gustavo, I thank you. So I could talk about this all day long, by the way, but I know we're obviously at our time. So I'll wrap us up here in just a second, but thanks so much for coming on and just, talking shop with me.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. Hopefully we can connect. Reach out, please.
Absolutely. Thanks, man. Well, the future of leadership is you, it's me, it's us, and the cultures that we create together. We are all ambassadors for the culture that we want to create. So thanks to everybody for being a part of the conversation today. I hope you found it as interesting and hopefully, set a good temperature for you. Hopefully it breathed a little oxygen into you today. And I appreciate and thank Gustavo again for coming on and sharing about his new book. Calibrating our own thermostat, taking time again to step back and to reflect and to think about, well, what is the temperature that we as individuals are hoping to set, not perfectly, but hoping to set, and then being courageous enough to say, what is that temperature that we want to set with our team, with our organization, with the people around us, to be strategic and intentional about that design that you heard Gustavo talking about and setting that temperature. It won't just magically happen. And then once we've got a good design and intention and commitment from each other, what are the mindsets that we're going to continue to breathe life into to help us along every step of the journey? So thank you everybody for listening today. Hope you'll stay tuned. More great episodes coming your way, and have a great day. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.